if I want to animate, the first thing I'm going to do is to set up and create something to animate. So I could create a circle, I could create a box, more of a square. It's not really a box, it's not three-dimensional yet, but I could make it that way if I wanted. Or I could make a character. So we have eyes. So now I have something that we get to animate. Maybe this is my character that's going to be afraid of zombies today, or it will be the great zombie hunter, continuing with our zombiness that's happened because Walking Dead has now come out on Netflix. Season 1 and Season 2 will be aired, I believe, this week.
Yeah, Season 2 started.
So it's an exciting time for people who like zombie shows. So if I have a character like this and want to convert it to a symbol so that I can start to animate it, I need to select it. And I can do it by grabbing the select tool and marking it. Now, that puts the little bit of the hash pattern on it so we can see that it's been selected, so that if I move it, we can see that I selected all of my pieces. Using the select tool, I can highlight and select all of it. If I click off, it's not selected. If I click on part of it, that would select the continuous lines, but we can see these lines weren't connected, so it doesn't select those. So when I'm trying to select everything and put it together, if I want to do that, the select tool is going to be my best option. And I can click and drag around. If I select only part of it, then that won't get all of it. So I do have to make sure that I select appropriately. Select all of this, and now if I want to animate this, it's going to be useful to convert this to a symbol so that I can start moving it around on my stage. And we will also notice that in the timeline down here that my keyframe has content. It's no longer an empty circle, but it's now a filled circle. So that indicates that it has content. So to convert this to a symbol, I can go under this Modify pull-down menu and choose Convert to Symbol. I can also hit F8 on the keyboard, which is my preferred way of doing it, and that allows me to convert this to a symbol. And later on we will talk about the difference between the different symbol types of movie clip and graphic and look at some pros and cons of why I would want to use one over the other, because there are good reasons for using each of those. Now I'm going to take this symbol and I can give it a name. Convention holds that you name your symbols with a capital letter, and it's a good practice to get into of don't use any spaces, don't begin with numbers, and just use letters and possibly an underscore if you need to. So I'm going to call this guy. Now that I have this converted to a symbol, it does make it much easier to move around the stage. One thing to keep in mind, so when I created this, I just used the default registration point, so we can see there's a little X in the corner. If I want to modify this after it's been created or turned into a symbol, so this is something that's important, that sometimes people are apprehensive about converting something to a symbol because, well, the artwork's not done yet. That's okay. Because even though you made it a symbol, you can modify it. So what I can do, I can either look over at my library, and I can see that there's my symbol, guy. We can see a little thumbnail of him. And if I double click on this, it will bring me into symbol editing mode, and I can start editing the symbol. If I double click on the artwork on my stage, that's called Edit in Place, which allows me to edit my symbol right here, which when I have 10 or 12 layers, if I want to see how my artwork looks compared to my background or to other symbols and things like that, I might want to edit it in place. And we do that by double clicking on the artwork. And now at the top of the screen here, we will see it says Scene 1, and now we have the name of the symbol. So we can see there's my symbol, there's scene 1. I can go back to scene 1. If I double click over here on the icon, not the name, double clicking on the name allows me to change the name to be something else. But double click on the type of symbol icon, and now we can see it's the same sort of thing, but this drops away the background. This only shows me the symbol. And what I'm going to do to this is fill in some of these areas, because it's going to be really hard for me to keep moving and grabbing him when he's in effect transparent. All he is a bunch of outlines, because if I look at my movie and change the background color on my movie, we can see that it's just a bunch of outlines, and it's kind of hard to select him. So I really want to, say if I choose blue, now if I had something more contrasting like orange, then we get a better contrast. I just go with a basic gray. The blue doesn't show up really well, so I'm going to give him, and I'm going to say use auto recovery, so then if Flash crashes, it's been auto saving, so that will hopefully make my life a little bit nicer. If you keep your document open for a while, it will automatically prompt you, do you wish to use auto recovery or not? And then you can say yes or no for that particular file. And then it will keep auto saving while you're working, so theoretically if Flash crashes along the way, you're not going to lose as much. So I can double click here and then grab my paint bucket, and we'll put some color in his face. Oh, missed. And the paint bucket is not filling his arm because there is a gap. So I need to say, close gaps there. And now let's go red shirt. And those gaps are probably a little big, but alright. Oh, good enough. Doesn't really matter what the colors are. But now if I go back to my scene, I can see here is my character. I can move it around. It's a symbol. And I'm going to just make the background color a little more contrasting so it has more contrast with the blue. Now what I will want to do is, as I work with this, name my layers. If I name my layers, that gives me a lot more help along the way of being able to figure out what I'm doing. So now I have my character here, and if I want my character to move across the screen, what I can do is I can right click on my character, and the first option is create motion tween. I can also right click on the frame. The first option is create motion tween. And somewhere under insert I can choose motion tween. So there's 3 different ways to get to the same end result of I want to create a motion tween. When I do that, it by default adds 1 second of animation. So now we can see there are extra frames occurring here. Now these frames, we can see that Flash filled them with the like a light blue color, kind of a light cyan color. It also changed the icon for the layer. The icon now shows kind of a little box with trails behind it indicating motion. This is a motion tween layer. If I add a new layer, we can see it has a page icon on it, indicating that's just an artwork layer. So I'm going to, on this artwork layer, I'm going to make some artwork and just choose a nice light blue color. Draw in a box. Okay, that's going to be my sky. And I'll name it accordingly shortly. brownish color. We have sky and ground occurring here. Now, as we can see, these two layers are, or these two colors are on top of my character. So if I want to adjust that, so that those layers are beneath my character, I can go in my layers palette, or layers on my timeline, and just drag the layer down. Now we can see my character is on top of the ground and the sky. So I'm just going to call this, what was layer 2, I'll call this background.
It doesn't let me draw.
So to animate a sun on this background, so if I want to animate this, if I go ahead and draw the sun on my background layer, if I go grab a brush, I want to first have nothing selected. Now grab my paintbrush, and I can now choose a nice. So if I have a sun here, the problem that I'm going to run into is if I go to animate this is I drew it on the background layer. It cuts a hole in the background layer. Each layer has in effect one thickness of pixels or of color. And anytime I add new color to it and move it, it cuts it out. So I can move the blue. So what you really need to do is to not put multiple objects on one layer when you're creating them. When I go to create objects, they should each get their own layer. And when I'm animating, each object does need to be on its own layer. So while you work in Flash, if you build a really complex animation, it's not unheard of to have a couple dozen or more layers. That's normal. So don't freak out. It's like, oh my gosh, I have 50 layers. But if you have a lot of stuff animating, 50 layers is no big deal. So don't worry about how many layers. Just know that each object really should get its own layer. So I have my background. If I want to animate a sun, I'll make a new layer. I'll call that sun. What I'm also going to do as part of this then is lock the layers I'm not using. That's always a good practice. Lock whatever layers you're not working with. And now I'll go grab my paintbrush, and I want a little yellower color. So I'll choose a yellow color. Add in my stuff around the sun. Actually not going to do that because I want to have a little bit more fun with my sun. I'm just going to take initially, there's my sun color, and I can fill it with a even brighter. Now because my other layers are locked, I can go through and just drag and select those frames, and I will take this and convert this to my sun. So there's my sun symbol. And I'm going to animate this. I'm going to add some special features to it in a little bit. But if I want the sun to go across my stage, I'm going to then right-click on it and choose Create Motion Tween. And we'll see that it once again adds the blue frames versus the gray. Gray means I have artwork on that frame, but it's not changing. That's what the gray means. The blue indicates the artwork is changing. Now that I added the motion tween at frame 1, I'm going to start over here. And at my ending frame, I'm going to end over here. And now if I play my movie by hitting the Enter key, we'll see the sun flies across the screen. So time is going very quickly now. This whole chunk in my timeline is referred to as a tween. What I can do with that is I can modify that path. If I put with the select tool, if I go near my path, it will show me that it's going to give me the path modification icon where it shows the little curved line next to my path. And my sun could actually follow a nice arcing path. So all I'm doing is just putting my select tool next to the path and I can change it. And now if I scrub the timeline, we'll see that it's following a curving path. If I wanted to adjust a very specific point in that timeline, I could move to a certain position, and then I could move the sun, and we would see that now we're getting kind of a up and down movement occurring very quickly and easily. And during animation, we are not required to follow the rules of physics in the natural world, so we can be creative and interpretive and expressive with what we do. So I'm going to let my son do that just because I can. This whole path that it's following, this path is modifiable. I can modify that path using the free transform tool. Third tool down in my tool palette, I choose free transform tool, and we'll see that it now puts controls, a transform box, so I can now make this path more dramatic, less dramatic, and scrub the timeline and see that I have even more richness with it. And the free transform tool allows you to do scale changes, as well as if I needed to rotate it, so that if my world was turned kind of upside down, so to speak. So we have any number of options. I can also, with the free transform, I can compress it, and we'll see that now my sun has been squished and is following a very different path. So the question came up of how do I grab one of the points on this path? And those points aren't control points like Bezier handles as much as each dot represents a specific frame in my animation. Because it represents a specific frame, if I want to adjust it, I have to move my animation until I am at that frame. And then I can adjust my artwork at that point. And we'll see in the timeline how it's added in a keyframe. Motion tween keyframes have a different appearance. They don't look the same as standard keyframes. They're not the big round circle, but instead they are a diamond. So there is a visual demarcation that makes them appear a little bit different. Now if I want to adjust my artwork so that I change its properties at a specific point, I could, with the free transform, I could now make my circle smaller here so that it appears the sun is now going away. And I'm going to make this one smaller too, just for fun, because I can. Again, the rules of the natural universe and physics don't always apply when we're building animations. So if this were really occurring, I think our little character would burn up at some point. If the sun went from being livable when it's small and then getting that big, I think the little guy would probably fry. But, you know, that's okay. It's all good fun. So now I've created my animation. Now if I decide I like this and want to work with it, we can see that it's flying by really, really fast. But animation is simply change over time. That's all animation is, change over time. So if I want to adjust this, we can see I have my change occurring. But perhaps it's occurring too quickly. Not enough time. Time in Flash is represented by frames. So these frames we see in the timeline. If I want to make this take more time, when it's a tween, if I put my cursor near the end of the tween, I can see that it gives me an indicator that I can adjust the length of this. So I have the standard arrow, get to the end of that tween, Now, whoop, not right click, but I can now stretch this out. And we can see there's a lot more dots occurring, dots representing frames. But if I watch this, we can see that it's now moving much slower, taking less time. I can also see in my timeline how my background disappeared because its frames don't exist through the full duration of my sun animation. So to add that, this is an important point, an important technique here, which is I need to click out in the timeline, and I can add more frames to this layer by simply hitting F5 on the keyboard. I could right click and say insert frame. I think if I hold down the command key, it gives me the arrows to stretch it the same way it did for the tween, so I could do that as well. Holding down command, I can drag it out. I can click in the timeline and hit F5 and drag it out. So there's my sun. Now, to show the differences, okay, the sun exists for that length of time. My character is going to very quickly move across the stage. Now, if I double click or click and drag to, or click on the end and it selects the whole thing, and that highlights that tween, I can just move that in my timeline so that he's here, and if we go to here, he doesn't exist. He's locked, so I can't move him. So I will lock the sun layer, unlock my character layer, move him off stage, and at the end, I'm going to put him up here. If I hold down Shift, it scales proportionally. It's now moved him off screen, so you can see very quickly it's going back in space. Now, if I want to adjust that path a little bit, if I go back to the Select tool, I can adjust that path. If I want more control over that adjustment, I can use the sub-selection or direct selection arrow if you're used to Illustrator nomenclature, and I can now adjust the curvature of this. Oh. So now that it's moving him around, I want him to start a little bit smaller. He's at his biggest point here. So this is where, and Q is free transform. So I can use that. So I want him to be bigger here. And then at this point, a little bit smaller. So we can see come forward, go back. All right, so now I have that path occurring. And we can see he's not there, he's there, and he's not there. And we can see that by in the timeline, there's empty frames before and after on my character. So if I run my movie, the sun starts moving, and we can see how he is animating across the screen. Now there's some subtlety here that is always nice to play with on the animation. And this is something that's kind of fun with this new animation model that you couldn't previously do, which is to adjust the kind of spacing of these keyframes. Realistically, he's moving across, but then it only takes a few frames for him to quickly disappear in the distance, so it's like he's rocketing back in space. But that diminishment of scale for that kind of change would indicate it's probably should take longer than what it's doing here. So one thing that you can do is I can select an individual keyframe. I can now move that keyframe here all. We can see, oh, it didn't quite behave as I wanted. So my path didn't work quite right, but I can adjust that by clicking on that point. I can pull the handles back a little bit so it doesn't. So now quickly move across and then much slower start moving back and off screen. So anytime you add a keyframe, you can adjust it. Now the original keyframes on the sun layer, if we turn off the character and just watch the sun, the original keyframes on the sun layer, when I made it longer, it proportionally spaced them out, which is a nice feature that Flash has, so that if you build your animation and it's too fast, it will proportionally space those frames. So if we notice, there's about equal distance between kind of these first two keyframes, but then more at the end. If I stretch it back, we will see that it's maintaining about equal distance, and then about 1.5 times that for the ending part. So it proportionally is adjusting the keyframe. So it's a really cool feature that they've integrated into the program. So now I have my sun moving, my character, I turn him back on, and I've adjusted his speed, change over time. Slower off into the distance because it's allowing more frames for him to recede, fewer frames to fly across the screen, so he goes faster. Change over time. Less change over a greater length of time makes something appear slower. More change, fewer frames, makes it appear to be a faster movement or faster transformation. That's the key concept that you need to work with when you're building your animation. Now I can test my movie and we can see it run. We can see it just keeps looping and looping and looping. So as I look at my project and see here, if I want to edit the symbol, so I'm going to edit my sun. If I click on it, we can see there's the symbol. Once again, I can go in my library, double click on the symbol type icon, and this little gear indicates it's a movie clip symbol, but it's not that important right now. But if I double click on this, here I'm doing what is referred to as edit in place, which is down here, edit in place. When I look at that, I can now see my other layers disappeared. I only have layer 1 for my sun. And I can see my other layers behind. So it gives me that sense of place. Now I am going to add a new layer. And I am going to add the rays for my sun. And we looked at this last time, and it's worth talking about again. But this whole concept of putting something inside something else, these rays, I'm going to make them a brighter or stronger color so they show up a little bit better. It's a red sun. I watched the original Superman movie with Christopher Reeves over the weekend with the kids, and so we got a red sun of Krypton here. I'm gonna have to just color the whole thing and make this a red sun of Krypton because I can. There we go. There, it's the red sun of Krypton. So he has no superpowers. He's not going to be allowed to fly. But with my red sun here, we have the main body of the sun on one layer, the rays of the sun on a different layer. I drew those rays while I'm inside the sun symbol. But with them selected, so click off, I can use the marquee tool, or the selection tool, and I can select them. I can also just click on this keyframe and that highlights the artwork on that layer. And because I know that's the only artwork on the layer, that's okay that I can do it that way. I'm going to convert this to a symbol. So I'm going to convert this to my sun rays, because you can have symbols within symbols within symbols ad nauseum. So now I have my sun rays around my sun. Now this is one of those times where it would have been a good idea to pay attention to the registration point of my symbol, or when I created it. I'm going to kind of undo this and redo the process here. So it's been selected. I hit F8, and now I can choose the registration point. Currently, it would default to the top left corner. These sun rays I want to spin. Because I want them to spin, it makes more sense to have something spin around its middle, like the hub on a bike wheel, than to spin around its corner. We'll leave it at the corner for now, because we'll watch the difficulty that can happen. Because if I want this to spin without me having to do a lot of work, now that it's a symbol, I can right-click, if I can get my mouse over it, create motion tween. If you click on the tween, we can rotate something one time. Oh, sure. It's behaving now. Sometimes you get lucky. Or did I click on center?
Wasn't that center dot in there? Isn't that what it's rotating around, not
the
cross?
It is rotating around the center dot, and you can modify that. But sometimes it will put that center dot on the cross, so it will rotate kind of around that corner. So I don't want my sun rays rotating like, well, I could if it's a really bizarre sun, but I'm not going to do that for this particular project. So I'm just going to undo, because I like to have my symbols nicely named. So and this is the good part about Flash. You can undo until you're from when you open a document, you can undo for a ridiculous amount of steps. So I just undid a whole bunch of different things. So F8, this will be my sun rays. Here's my sun rays. Right-click, motion tween, and click on the tween. If I click on the tween and not on the objects, I can rotate this one time. And that now makes my sun rays rotate. If I take my sun and give my sun frames by hitting F5 on the keyboard, we can now see that the red sun of Krypton has rotating frames, or rays. If I want those to go faster, fewer frames. If I want them to go slower and rotate really, really slow, I give this more frames. So if I take this tween and say rotate 3 times, we will see that we can't really even see it, more kind of flickers than rotates, because the amount of movement versus the number of frames, it's not going to be very smooth animation. But if we were to give it more frames or fewer frames, so if we just say 1 frame, then at that point we get that sense of, I like the rotating versus the flickering. It's just a little bit more fun.
So that's rotating, you put 1 up there.
The animation now has a symbol. It has both artwork and as a symbol, and that symbol of the sun rays is being tweened inside my sun symbol. So now if I watch my animation, we can see there's the sun. And if I test my movie, we'll see that the rays of the sun, the red sun of Krypton, are flying through. And amazingly, as the sun is even touching the ground and floating over it, he's not getting burned. So I'm really impressed at his resilience to the heat of this red sun. So the question came up of the rays of the sun when I scrub the timeline don't animate. I test my movie, they animate. That is because a movie clip's timeline, when I put a movie clip on the main timeline, whatever animation is inside that movie clip, we won't see animate. If this symbol were not a movie clip, but were a graphic symbol, which is a different symbol type. So when we look at the sun is a movie clip. If I right click and choose properties, the sun is a movie clip. If the sun were a graphic symbol's timeline is 100% linked to the root or main timeline. A movie clip's timeline operates completely independently of the main timeline. So the sun is spinning kind of as fast as it wants to spin up to the frames per second. But if it were critical that the sun were animating perfectly to each frame of my main timeline, if I played this long enough, it would actually start to go out of sync. Because the movie clip's timeline will kind of play as fast as it can play, and sometimes it will be able to play a little bit faster than the main timeline. So if I let my animation run long enough, we'll see that it starts not being 100% in sync with the main timeline. A graphic symbol only advances when the main timeline advances, so its timeline stays fixed. Now you may be wondering, well then why would we ever want to use a movie clip if it doesn't stay attached to the main timeline? And that's because there will be times where when you build a project, something like the main timeline is parked. If the main timeline is parked, my sun can still spin. So I am going to, just temporarily right now, I'm going to insert just a little bit of code here. That we don't have to worry about, but just for demonstration purposes, my movie is going to go, and we can see that even though I stopped at frame 35, my sun is still animating. Movie clips will play whether the main timeline is still moving or not. That's one of the advantages of a movie clip. But if this same artwork were a graphic, if I switch it to a graphic symbol and scrub the timeline, notice it is moving. But now if I run my movie, sun goes and it stops. A graphic symbol's ability to advance frames is linked to the main timeline's advancement of frames. So much so that if I go backwards, it goes in reverse. If I go forward, it goes, which is nice. But the movie clip can play independently. Movie clips also have additional properties that allow you to do certain transformations that you do not have the effect that you can't do when it's a graphic symbol. As a graphic symbol, I have an X and a Y and a width and a height. And I have color effects. I can't apply any filters to this. I can't apply any three-dimensional transformations because this is a graphic symbol. But if this were a movie clip, I now have 3D I can apply. So I can adjust a Z property of my artwork. I have filters I can apply. So, well, this is a sun. So for the sun here, and the problem now is I built my animation, so getting the filter to apply to all of it might be a little bit annoying. But if I wanted to, say, put a blur on my sun, I can see now it's blurred. So it gets a little bit of fuzziness to it, which is kind of fun. I could also apply a glow. Let's go with a yellow glow to make it more sun-like. Make the glow bigger. Not seeing a lot of the glow though, unfortunately, on this background. Yeah, white's not doing it. Get almost a shadowy glow. Let's choose pink. On a darker background, the glow would be a little bit stronger, but now I've been able to put these filters on it. Oh, see, now you can see the glow occurring on the darker background. It's kind of fun. So if I want to use certain features in the program, like glows, or these filter effects of blur, glow, drop shadow, if I want to use 3D effects, those require movie clips. If I want to animate this and be able to watch it advance in the main timeline, I need to use a graphic symbol. And it says, hey, some of that stuff's going to go away, and I'll say, okay, I know. But now I get to see it animate. So I have to decide what's more important to me. Now sometimes what you can do is you can set it up and then swap it to a graphic symbol so I can see what's happening with my animation. And once I'm happy with how everything moves, then at that point make it a movie clip so I can do cool effects like blurs.
Can you make the blur like less at 1/8?
So I've created a whole bunch of objects here, and they all happen to be on one layer. It's currently called layer 5. Now one of the cool things that you can do when you start positioning and arranging and working with objects, if I want to animate each one of these independently, that means each one needs to be on its own layer. To get them onto their own layer, the process that used to take place in Flash would have been I would select all of these objects. I would copy them. I would delete all but one object. I would create a new layer. I would paste. Then I would delete all but the next one. Or then I would delete the first one, copy that, and just go through this progressive like copy, paste, delete, selection. And if you're trying to, say, animate a whole sentence where you want each letter to be able to animate independently, which I'll demonstrate that in just a second, further cement this, it was a colossal pain in the butt. Because if you want to animate things independently, they all need to be on their own layer. To get everything onto their own layer really stinks. Unless, now that I drew these, if I right-click, there's an option called Distribute to Layers. And if I look at this, I will now see that it just created a layer, box, circle, triangle, triangle, circle, box. It created the layers based in the order that the objects, box, circle, triangle, then triangle, circle, box, circle, triangle, box. So it created all these layers, one per object. So they can now all be animated independently of each other. If I want to just do the triangles, then what would work is to shift select my 3 triangles. So they're now selected. And then what I could do is I could cut them so they're now off of their 3 separate triangles. I could click on the layer I want to put them on. And if I want them still to be in the same physical position that they were, the same X and Y coordinates, I could use paste in place, which is paste with a shift added to it. So Command V is paste, the up arrow is shift. So paste in place will remember, otherwise paste will put them in the center of the screen. But if I want paste in place, like that, it puts them where they were. Now all 3 are on one layer. And if I do that, create motion tween, it's going to give me a message. Remembering the one object, one layer, when you're animating, it says multiple objects are selected. You must convert them to a symbol in order to tween them. So it's asking me, do I want to convert them to a grouped symbol, so a symbol that is composed of these three triangles, so that I can animate them as a whole. And knowing that, I would rather than convert it myself, so I hit F8 and triangle group. There it is. And now, at that point, I can create my motion tween. And my triangles move as a group. If I want to animate that box, create motion tween. And now it flies over. Now that my text is made on screen, if I want to animate this text, what I can do is I need to, if I want each letter to move independently from its neighbor, I need to convert this text into individual pieces. To do that, I can right-click and choose Break Apart, which is also under the Modify menu, Break Apart, Command B. And what that did is that now converted each letter to its own text field. I'm going to lock that other one so I don't choose it accidentally. So now that's a symbol. Or not a symbol yet, but it can be a symbol momentarily. Because each is its own object, now I have an option to distribute to layers. What's really cool is not only did it distribute to layers, it named each of those layers. Again, remember the whole select all, deselect one, cut, add a new layer, paste, deselect one, cut, and going through that whole process. And you still have to name all your layers manually. This distribute to layers, where it automatically takes care of this stuff, is really, really fun. Now, if I'm lazy, with that text field, I can now convert it. Now, if we look here, if you look, I did not convert that letter to a symbol. Normally for tweening, we need to use symbols, but when I'm using a text field, Flash is willing to cut me a little bit of slack, and I can now convert everything to a motion tween, because this as a text field is a vector symbol, because it's using vector information, and it's happy enough to say, that's a text field, it's close enough to a symbol, so I'll let you tween it. Now, I'm not going to get all the rights and privileges or other fun that I would get, say, if this were a movie clip, or apparently I am, because I can do filters and other things. But because these are symbols, if we go to the end of my animation, if I wanted my A to go to here, my M to go to here, we can see now my type just exploded, moved out. Now it's all taking 90 frames. So if I run my movie, we can see, wow, that's just not really doing it for me. So what I really want to do is probably pull it in. And now what would be nice is if Flash allowed me to pull in multiple ones like that, but it doesn't.
Would you ungroup it, pull it in, and then regroup it? I mean,
So to tweak the timing on this, we tried unsuccessfully. If I just pull this over, we notice that a letter disappears until, and then it magically comes back. So that's not really going to be a good solution. But if I hold down Command, I can click and select that first frame. Then if I hold down Option, it allows me to make a copy of that frame. So now that first keyframe and the second keyframe are the same, So it staggers it, because this is something that you may run into as you work on your project. Hold down Command to select it, Option to create the clone, Command to select it, Option to create the clone, Command to select it, Option to create the clone, Command, Option, Command, Option, Command, Option, Command, whoop, missed, Option, Command, Option. So we can see now it has this rolling effect. And it does take place in the span of 1 second. And by giving fewer frames to effectively the same kind of animated effect, notice how it's then being very fast at the end. Change over time. A better name for this is going to be guy standing. Because then what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click and say duplicate. And make a copy of my guy standing, and this is going to be my guy walking. Now if I want him walking, we can see here he is, and turn on, and actually I'm not even going to worry too much about onion skinning here, but here is the guy, and I'm going to do a little cutting here. And this is going to be right leg, left leg, and in a more complex example I would probably separate out his arms and head from the body as well, but I'm going to just do the legs now in the interest of time. So now I'm going to convert the rest of this guy to, this will be guy body. Remembering the lessons of earlier, if I want to it'll be close enough. Lessons of earlier. If I want to animate this, we need to choose there. So click on the keyframe to select all the pieces of artwork. Then I get action. Okay. Why is it not? I should get distribute to layers here. Okay. So I have guy body, left leg, right leg. Now, if I'm going to animate this, effectively I'm going to just use the free transform and rotate it. Now, what I will notice as it moves through, so if it goes from back to here, it's not really rotating at the place I need it to rotate. That's one problem. I'm going to zoom in so it's easier to see that as a problem. Now, with the free transform, I can drag my registration point that I wanted to transform on. We can see, okay, now it moves here. One problem I'm going to run into is that the artwork on my leg terminates. It doesn't kind of give this illusion of being part of the body, so I can really see kind of how it's separate. So I need to modify this leg a little bit. If I double click on it, we'll see at the top, Scene 1. Guy walking symbol. Now we're in the right leg symbol. What I can do within the right leg symbol is I switched over to the eyedropper, chose the blue color. Now I'm going to need a bigger brush to match the zoom here. I'll extend that up. I'm going to grab the eraser tool and just get rid of these seams. Eyedropper to get my green, B to get back to the brush. So I've now extended the leg out. If I go back to guy walking and put the leg back where it was before, now when it rotates, if I go too far, maybe we need to move that registration point up higher so it's more rotating kind of at the hip. And now we have a leg moving, so I'm going to get a little better animation. Now for this leg, I want to do the same thing. So I can double click on it and grab my paintbrush tool. You can see now the leg appears to animate. So to build this animation, I can highlight a couple frames, create motion tween, have the body extend out, 5. Now, if I want my starting and ending frame to be the same, I can hit F6 at the end here. So start and end. And if I want at the midpoint to be the same, so I can have a forward and a back motion for each leg. So this is really kind of the cheater way of animating versus doing frame by frame animation where you really pay attention to your movements. So at this point I can hit F6 again and F6 again. So now we have those keyframes. So now I can, if the leg here is going to go forward during this cycle, and this leg is going to go back, and now forward,
It looks like WAP.
yeah, it looks way off, but he's going to have a very distorted walk. This is why I prefer frame-by-frame animation or positioning things individually. I was trying to cheat, and I think I screwed myself in the process, but that's okay. It's just a demonstration piece. You will do much better than this. So I have guy walking. Now, if I notice, at this point I just want the guy to, he's going to just kind of pop on stage and be there. But my walking guy here, if I could go under guy walking, and we look at, oh, it's locked, that's why I can't choose him. If we look at guy walking, we can see currently it's guy standing. But if I want him to be walking, there's this nice little button here.
Ooh, swap.
Swap.
I like swap.
And make sure it's guy walking, and making sure he's staying as guy walking all the way through. Now, just so we can see it actually worked, if we say, well, I want him to be a graphic, we should So we can see the legs are moving. Unfortunately, because he's walking so quickly, we don't get to see a lot of motion. So let's just take this whole animation, whoop, and he gets to exist. And sometimes when you try and drag it, it doesn't always go where you want. More frames so we get to see. Now you can see when I drag this, you can see his legs moving. And if I run it, he's mostly off screen down there. But you saw at the side over here.
Yeah, we can see that.
Now one of the things that happened is, if you notice, I made my background artwork bigger than my stage, so I can't really see what's going on. I can say, show me the rulers. The rulers are there, and once I have the rulers up, I can actually position guides so that I can start to see where my stage is. So I can see that when he got down here, he really is off screen. But the nice part is, I'll just move his whole animation up so it gets to take place on screen. So I had a little squishing going on, but now we can see more walking with Amazing Type. And then the standing one appears at the very end. Of course, if that standing one we wanted not to be standing, but to be walking as well, double click. Now it's a walking version, and I could set it to a graphic so we can even see how he's stuck in place. Or, even more fun than that, great motion tween. And now he's pulling a little moonwalk action going on there.